They go way back. They go way back to about the time the dinosaurs first originated, and they've spread all over the world, and they've made it through many, many natural disasters. But now the 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 symbolism is changed quite a bit here. I was trying to, but is that the turtles are really in a race to um, to keep from going extinct. They're, as a group, um, they're highly endangered, and I tried to get my artist high school daughter to make a special uh, drawing here, but she couldn't finish it in time. Because what I really wanted was the angry rabbit to be holding a meat cleaver, um, chasing the desperate turtle. So that's the, sort of, that's a better um, description of the current state of affairs. So as an outline here of what I'm going to talk about, I'll first, hopefully make the case to you that turtles are really in dire need of help, and why that's important. I'm not talking about sea turtles, because they actually have their own pretty active organization. I'll be talking about freshwater turtles and tortoises all over the world. Then I'll introduce you to the organization that Paul mentioned, the Turtle Survival Alliance, and what they do, and what attracted me to them. And then I'll go through several example programs that the TSA is working on, and that are really all successes, and some of them are stunning successes. So the main message here is that if people, a dedicated group of people, put their mind to it, they can really save animals from extinction. And along with that, the sort of bycatch of other species that are also saved in the same ecosystem. So freshwater turtles and tortoises, quick review. There are currently about 350 species, and in addition to that, another 120 subspecies. And I'll come back to that later on, because that differentiation has become a major bone of contention in the conservation industry, if you will. And then of that 350, 34% of them are either endangered, critically endangered, or actually extinct in the wild. And there are quite a few species that are extinct in the wild, but we are still maintaining in captive assurance colonies, waiting for when there's an opportunity to reintroduce them. But overall, if you also include the threatened category, over half of the turtles are imminently threatened with extinction. Among the groups of large vertebrates, they're actually tied more or less with the primates for being the group that is most in danger of extinction. And on top of all that, about 8 to 9% of the turtle species are what are called data deficient. We don't know enough about them to give them a red list category of whether they're endangered, critically endangered, or whatever. So that's another area that in the future we really want to focus on. So here are a couple of pie charts to illustrate these things. You can see how the purple, red, orange, and yellow are really the 52% that are really seriously threatened with extinction. And I'll go into some of the groups real quickly. For those of you that aren't familiar with softshell turtles, this is one of the groups that's highly, highly endangered, but for a variety of reasons is not currently a high priority for conservation organizations, but we want to make it that way in the future. These turtles have no plates on their back. They actually have the same bone structure that regular turtles do, but the whole thing is covered with a layer of skin. And unfortunately, these turtles are extremely delicious and have been hunted to near extinction all over the world. And this gives you the breakdown of, among the species, there are only 6 here that are not really considered to be threatened, and 3 of those are the 3 species that are in the United States, and one of them is what's called the Chinese soft shell, which has actually almost become an invasive species. But all the others, and most of these are very large animals. The Florida soft shell that occurs in peninsular Florida easily gets to 2.5 feet in diameter. And the largest ones in Asia and China get even much larger than that, 3 feet in diameter and weigh a couple hundred pounds. So there's a lot of meat there, and they're unfortunately delicious, and they've suffered the consequences. Among tortoises, which are turtles that are confined to living on land, an even higher percentage are in serious trouble. There've been probably, I added it up once, approximately 20 species of large to giant tortoises have been exterminated by man since the Pleistocene. There were many in Eastern US, in Eastern Africa, South Asia. They were all wiped out before we ever found out about them. But they are all in very serious trouble. The Geoemidae, I apologize for having to use the scientific name because there's really no general term for these, but they're the large family of Asian freshwater turtles with hard shells. And most of you probably have never seen any of them, but they are also delicious and have been hunted to extinction. Unfortunately, there are still 8 of them that are data deficient. And the majority of these are from Southeast Asia and Southern China, and they've really been in big trouble too. So the reasons for these threats, the main sort of slow nagging one has been habitat alteration and destruction. You know, it's hard to find a river in the world that hasn't been severely altered or polluted. But in the last 30 years, another angle has come into this. You know, people have eaten turtles locally all over the world, and that has continued to cause their decline. But as the majority of people in China have acquired more disposable income, they have pretty much wholesale collected for consumption probably 80% of the world's turtles all over the world. And there's an interesting phenomenon that has happened just in the last 20 years. And that is that as they got more disposable income, the pet trade in China for turtles has grown exponentially. And you know, China in many Asian cultures, but especially in China, the turtle is associated with health and long life and has lots of medicinal qualities, none of which, to my knowledge, have ever been actually proven, but they're culturally extremely important. And there's just the huge markets that have grown there have had a tremendous impact on turtles all across the world. And then a fourth problem that currently is actually being fostered primarily by Singapore, because Singapore, one of their main ways of expanding their territory is to fill in areas around the city. And I saw this firsthand 20 years ago when I was discussing with the Singapore government a potential pharmaceutical plant in Singapore. And, I wanted to see where they were going to construct it. And they took me out to the end of a wharf and pointed out in the water and said, right there. So they were wholesale importing huge amounts of soil and gravel and sand from all over Southeast Asia and filling in, creating new land. And so the sand mining has become, it really has become a major problem. And it's an illegal bootleg operation where people go and just take the sand from rivers, and they take the areas where river dwelling turtles lay their eggs. And this is just a growing problem that I'm not sure how we're going to deal with ultimately. So, these are just a couple of horror pictures, and I don't want to, I'm sorry to keep blaming China, but because it's all over the world. But China is by far the largest market for wild collected turtles for consumption and now for the pet trade. So in 2000, a group of conservationists from the American Zoo Association and the IUCN, International Union for the Conservation of Nature, declared an Asian turtle crisis. And that was because the populations of all these turtles throughout South and Southeast Asia were just crashing. But now that has become a global crisis. But in response to that, the Turtle Survival Alliance was created. And that's the organization that I'm on the board of directors of, and I'm heavily involved with their strategic planning and many on the ground conservation efforts that, like Paul alluded to. But I wanted to make one thing clear early on. There are two pretty much, unfortunately, competing organizations. The Turtle Conservancy is based here in California and is down in, has a very nice facility down near Ojai. And they are largely funded by a single individual, but they're doing a lot of really nice work. They've purchased land for preserves for several different turtle and tortoise species, but their scope is much more limited than the TSA, which, I just wanted to make it clear that these two are not the same, and they do compete to a certain extent for funding. I've followed both of them for many years and made contributions to both of them, but the TSA finally won me over for its basic science, its basic pragmatic approach, and the success that it's had. So it was founded in 2001 by the Turtle and Tortoise Specialist Group in response to this Asian turtle crisis. Since 2006, it's been an independent nonprofit conservation organization. And the thing that really struck me was it's committed to no turtle extinctions. And so that means that they are, I should say, we are involved in trying to protect every species of turtle, even the little sort of ugly, non-charismatic mud turtles in Mexico and Central America. And so we're, and that seems like a a grandiose sort of a statement. They actually have been very successful in this. One of the strategies is to partner with larger conservation organizations like the Wildlife Conservation Society, the Rainforest Trust, San Diego Zoo Global, Disney, various governments. And so those partnerships relegate to us the management and the scientific strategic planning behind these turtle conservation efforts. And so just to give you an idea, the TSA has a 1.2 million annual budget, and it's supported by grants. A lot of money comes from zoos, private donations, and they've built up a pretty reasonable endowment, which if I remember, I'll say some more about at the end, because Paul and I have talked a lot about this in regards to the garden, that this is a way of assuring continuity of funding through the storms of political ups and downs of government-based fund or public funding. So in addition, they operate they have a facility that's just outside Charleston, South Carolina. There's over 700 animals there that include assurance colonies of 17 critically endangered or actually extinct in the wild species. So these are sort of genetic arcs, if you will. They've accumulated animals, or they have agreements with private owners or zoos for breeding exchanges and things like that. And the idea of assurance colonies is just to maintain what genetic diversity you have until there's a time when there's an opportunity to start reintroducing them into the wild. They directly manage 21 of the top 25 most endangered species, but we're involved in about a third of all species. We're a worldwide organization. We have in each country, we always have a local country champion and expert who, so like, for example, in Madagascar, the whole operation there is Malagasy people, and same like in Myanmar, same in Belize. So we find it's critical to have to not being sort of colonial in our approach, and to engaging with the local conservation authorities, and also helping to educate and empower future local conservationists. And then the bottom line, the thing that really impressed me was that every single program that the TSA has been involved with, they've either stabilized and secured the numbers or dramatically increased the numbers of species which were really in bad shape. And so they really have been extraordinarily successful. So just quickly, the programs are all over the world. The one area that actually is the world's highest diversity of turtles is the southeastern United States. But we have enough infrastructure in place that our turtles are not disappearing the way that they are in Asia and Africa and South America. But we're going to be expanding much more in the US in the future. So sort of ignore the right-hand side. It's just to show you that we have a very sophisticated decision tree for strategic planning. And so what we're in the process right now is evaluating every species to decide what and if we should get involved with them. The priority is, like I say, has been for critically endangered and extinct species, but there are many that we're moving into a phase now where we want to try and prevent near threatened species from becoming endangered. And then one thing that really bothers me a lot and keeps me awake is we really want to try and make sure that none of these species fall through the cracks. So with that, I'll get into examples of these have all been very successful, but all of like I say, all the programs have been successful. So Batagur, I'll show you some pictures in a moment, are large river turtles in Asia, and they're in that Geoemeridae family that I mentioned before. They've been exploited for thousands of years for their eggs and their meat, and with the population explosions, they're all on the brink of extinction. And the last ones are, even though they're technically protected, they're frequently one or two are picked up as bycatch by fishermen. The immediate conservation strategy starting 20 years ago was to focus on nest protection, and then it moved into collecting the eggs, artificially incubating them, and head starting the babies and putting them back. One of the problems is that we, with satellite tracking that we've tried to do on some of the adults, they travel huge distances, and we frequently lose them. They just, you catch them, put up a transmitter on them, and they're 100 miles away 48 hours later. So that part of their biology is an area that we're very, very interested in. But they do tend to come back to the same area, not precisely the same beach, but to the same area to lay their eggs. And at two sites, one species in northeastern India and another in northern Myanmar, Burma, we've been releasing babies for about 10 years. And this year is when we hope to see our first head-started females show up on the nesting beaches. And we have one in Burma. We had a very interesting case where that species was down to probably half a dozen wild individuals. And there were 5 females that have continued to lay fertile eggs on one particular beach. And then 10 miles away, farther upstream, there was a single female that would lay eggs every year, and none of them were fertile. And a couple of years ago, so we've been collecting these, raising them and releasing them. And a couple of years ago, all of a sudden that female 10 miles away laid a couple of fertile eggs. And now she's laying complete clutches of fertile eggs. So that means that one of our males implies that one of our males that we had started and released grew up enough to start mating with her. So these are these are very long-term, tedious studies, but they all seem to be working. So here's just a quick picture of the 6 Batagur species on this right side. They're found in Myanmar, Bangladesh, Cambodia, India, Indonesia, and they're quite beautiful, especially the males have these brilliant head coloration in the mating season, and then they basically look just like the females the rest of the year, except for the length of their tail. But they're big animals. This woman's husband passed away several years ago, but he was a fisherman in India, and he caught this turtle. She thinks, well, from her memory, it was about 35 years ago, and it was an adult then. And he brought it to her to cook, and she said, no, I can't kill this. And she kept it as a pet in a pond in her front yard. And we found it by accident through the community, and it's a female, and she donated it to our captive breeding program, and it's now producing 20 or 30 eggs, fertile eggs every year. But these are big animals and unfortunately delicious. So on the tortoise side, here I start off with one of the most beautiful ones, the radiated tortoise from southern Madagascar. And these things are about 18 inches long. And at one time, they were thought to be the most common tortoise in the world. They were estimated to be 16 million of them in the early 60s in Madagascar. But in 1973, they were one of the first turtle species to be listed as critically endangered and covered by CITES Appendix 1. And CITES is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. So that meant that there was no restrictions on eating them or whatever in Madagascar, but they were restricted from international trade. And the reason they were placed there was because the second largest city in Madagascar, Tulier, is on the southwestern coast of Madagascar. And very rapidly in the 60s and 70s, the turtles completely disappeared from there. They were just eaten out rapidly. Now, to the east of there, the territory was much less accessible, and no one realized how many animals were there. And so it more or less was neglected and kind of ignored in the 80s, 90s, and into the 2000s because there were so many of them in that in the eastern part of the range. But now, lately, there has been two really nasty things. One, people from outside of their normal range, people who live in south central Madagascar, there's drought, they're protein deficient, and they have been coming down into the coastal region and butchering tens of thousands of these tortoises. And I have a couple of pictures, but they're so gruesome, I took them out. Piles of shells that are 30 feet high and 100 feet in diameter. And they basically cut up the animals, dry the meat, and take it back and sell it amongst themselves. And then in addition to that, the smaller animals that they capture that are too small to get much meat out of, they would try and sell them mostly to Malaysian and then Chinese pet dealers. But you know, the TSA and then the Hogel Zoo, which is in Salt Lake City, recognized that this was a really bad situation, and so they joined together and in 2012 built a turtle rescue center in southeastern Madagascar to take care of confiscated tortoises that were being collected by at the airport in Antananarivo or locally. And then TSA constructed a second facility in 2018 that I'll show in a minute. We had a small facility at this same site, but it just had a couple dozen animals in it. Currently, radiata, the radiated tortoise, and the what's called the spider tortoise that I'll show you in a minute, were the two that were primarily being confiscated. And so we've acquired quite a group. But this one, the plowshare tortoise that I'm not going to talk about, is from northwestern Madagascar, and it has been mercilessly decimated for pets. And a mature adult can sell for $50,000 in China at the snap of snap of your fingers. And so the people who were taking care of the reserve where they were at were the ones who were facilitating the poaching. And so now they're thought to be down to less than 50 individuals in the wild. But we have recently, in the last year and a half, acquired about 20 juvenile and adult animals from confiscations. And so we're now taking care of this one too. And we basically have the equivalent of an assurance colony in southern Madagascar. So here's a picture of Madagascar just to orient you. Antananarivo is in the middle. The tortoises, the spiny forest, the dry area of Madagascar is all down in here. And the people who are coming down to take the tortoises and eat them are basically from this region. And this is what the historical range originally was. Tulier is right here. And Fort Dauphin is over here. So in this part, they were wiped out very quickly. And that's what precipitated putting them on the CITES list. But now they're all around. They're still down in here. And at the national park at Cap Saint-Marie, the very southern tip, is the only place where you can go and still see, you can stand in one place and see 20 tortoises at once. It's amazing. But that's not going to last long, I don't think. So in 2018, we were faced with a horrendous situation. There was a huge confiscation, the largest in history, of 10,000 juvenile to mostly juvenile radiated tortoises, and they were seized in Tuliar, and they were kept in a house, and every square foot of the house had at least one tortoise in it. You know, they were piled on top of each other. They were being stockpiled for eventual transport to Chinese fishing vessels that were offshore. And we think that these were accumulated over up to a year and a half. So many of these animals had never been fed, had no water for a year and a half, and they were in bad shape. So the turtle conservation world immediately pulled together, and the TSA managed the whole operation. And we started, first we had veterinary students from the one vet school in Antananarivo. And then we started, every 2 weeks, we had a new group of 7 to 10 volunteers come in, and they would stay for 2 to 3 weeks. And that went on for, I think they had 7 teams. I happened to be down there for other reasons in the middle of this whole thing. So I was able to get some pictures. And actually, this is my sister here. She's retired, and she's a medical technologist, epidemiologist, and she immediately volunteered, jumped on a plane, and went to Madagascar. So of the 1,200 died within the first couple of weeks, and many of them had such decalcification of their shell that their shells were soft. You could, if you wanted to, punch your thumb through their shells. They were in really bad shape. But through triage, they were able to save about 9,000 of them. And this is one of the big heroes. This is the Dr. Niaina is our vet in Antananarivo, and she was the one who pulled together students from the veterinary school, and they were able to get to Tulier and start taking care of these animals before anyone else. And without that, we would have lost a lot more. It's mind-boggling to see 10,000 animals like this. Primarily the first response was just pure triage. they were, you know, trying to pull out the ones that were not going to make it, euthanize them if need be, and rehydrate and start refeeding the ones that were going to pull through. The dehydration was the primary threat. I mean, it's hot as hell down there, very dry. And so, you know, half a dozen people in each of the groups that went down there spent their whole time just moving these tortoises from container to container, well, from the pens to containers to get water every day. And that really saved the majority of them. These are the sorts of groups that went down there. They included people like my sister who had no real experience, to vets. There were lots of vets from different zoos, and it was really a great a great pulling together of everybody. We had Dr. Ken Conley, who's the pathologist from the for the Wildlife Conservation Society, and he all by himself just went through all those 1,200 animals that died, did tissue collection, necropsy, and made sure that there were no viral disease detected, and there was nothing that would risk putting the animals back into the wild. So we were very, very careful about that. And the Disney Foundation supported all that viral screening. So in the meantime, we needed to know where the heck we were going to put all these animals. And so at one of this minor site that we had, it's in the little village of Itampulu, which is near the larger village of Lavavulu, right on the coast. We had a small, well, 1,000 tortoises, I guess, isn't that small, but they basically had like a cinder block, 2 cinder blocks stacked on top of each other, wall around them, very insecure, and there was really no infrastructure there. So we were able to quickly raise funds, and we built a hell of a facility there. Over 1 kilometer of wall built by hand by the local people, with oversight and help from a couple of people from the US, and then with this chain link fence, or this wire fence put on the top. And we employed the entire village, everybody, within 10 miles. And they were all very happy to help and really enjoyed it. And more than half of them have continued to be, we're continuing to employ them to take care of the turtles and to provide security. Like I say, it was over 1 kilometer of perimeter wall fence. It's over 1/2 mile. And we built a new vet clinic and food prep storage area. So 37 American Zoological Society zoos and aquariums supplied personnel, financial support, and supplies. And none of this would have been possible without them. But TSA, usually are the boots on the ground that are managing with the support, the functional support from other groups like this. And so, there were over 500 private donors, 70 other organizations. It was really a sort of a galvanizing event. And it was, in the end, it was very successful. We were already caring for about 9,000 animals in our existing facility. We got 9,000 more. So we were up to 18,000 between 2 facilities. Long-term costs of food, staff, and I mean, high is relative. $3 per year per tortoise seems like nothing, but when you have thousands of them, it gets up there. And now the focus, primary focus is on how to reintroduce these into safe areas where they're not going to just be poached out again. Then in October of that year, 7,000 more were confiscated in a more remote area. And so we couldn't get, there was no place for anybody to stay there, no water, no facilities of any kind. So the best thing was we were able to get the 5,000 that that were healthy enough to transplant, moved to this new facility, to our new facility. So here we had another 5,000 of these things. So as of today, we have 35 employees in Madagascar. All of them are Malagasy citizens. The annual budget is running about a little over $200,000 a year, taking care of 24,000 tortoises. It's mind-boggling. You know, these were some of the additional donors that helped a lot. And now you know, it basically takes a whole village to feed these things. 250 kilograms of food per day for 15,000 tortoises at the one facility. And we're growing Opuntia cactus, which is an invasive species there in Madagascar, but the tortoises love the pads and the fruits. And then the tops of sweet potatoes are the primary forage for them. And that's really great because the people get paid for what they would normally throw away, the tops of the sweet potatoes, and they're incentivized to grow more sweet potatoes that they can sell and benefit economically from. So in addition to this, at our original facility, we now have 130 of these southern spider tortoises, which are only about 6 inches across. And they're beautiful little things. They live primarily right along the coast in areas where there are red sand habitats and white sand habitats all along the coast. And the spider tortoises live in the white sand habitat. And they literally are buried in the ground, estivating for 9 or 10 months of the year. And then in the rainy season, they pop up for 2 months and they're literally all over the place, and then they completely disappear. But they had to be housed in small groups because they will beat up on each other. And so we're now working on with the Rainforest Trust on the potential for acquiring a piece of land of this white sand habitat where we can start populating it with these animals. Now, the reintroduction strategy is very complicated. This guy, Josh Lucas, got his master's degree working on this. And then he had a bunch of variety of issues in his life, and he had to abandon the project. But he did finish his master's and establish the basis. So he spent 2 months in the field surveying 9 potential release sites. And one of them is a famous place. I don't know if any of you that have gone to Madagascar probably have heard of it, Barrenty, which is a private, an old French family sisal fiber plantation in southeastern Madagascar, and they have an area of riparian forest that was originally inhabited by these tortoises, but they were eaten out by the sisal workers, 80 years ago. And so now we actually have transported 1,000 of our tortoises to there and are in the process of releasing them into that area. So that is our first release site. So some of the factors here that play into were there tortoises there? We'd prefer not to mess with an existing population, but there are many places where the tortoises have been completely wiped out. The appropriate habitat has to be there. In many of these villages in the South, they have what are called sacred forests, and that's where they build their tombs and bury their dead. And then the community maintains an area that can be anywhere from 10 to 50 acres or more. And that's called their sacred forest, where they don't do anything. But these poachers from outside have swept into many of these and just collected all the tortoises out. Then we want to try and find places that are far away from roads and big towns, and therefore more accessible to poachers. And then what's the attitude of the local community? Are they willing to uphold their traditions, which in some of these villages, they protect the tortoises. I won't, it's much more complicated than that. But they either have a community culture of protecting them or not. And the best places are where they would already be sort of primed to protect them. And then whether they're really willing to take on the stewardship and what we can do to support them to make it more worth their while. And the culture down there is extremely complicated. So it's very difficult other people from central Madagascar are considered to be outsiders, and it takes years for them to develop a real relationship with many of these people. So for someone like Josh, a white boy from Oklahoma, it was not easy. He was actually able to accomplish way more than I thought he was going to be able to do, but just because he had an excellent personality and approach to everything. But establishing relationships within that culture is not trivial. So I'll move on to another one. And I'll try and move a little faster here, but this one is the Burmese star tortoise. It was once common in the dry forests in central Myanmar. It was slowly declining from local consumption and agricultural development till the 80s, and then China began wholesale collecting them for consumption, and they were determined to be extinct in the wild 15 years ago. But there was an assurance colony of about 200 confiscated individuals in Myanmar under the care of a woman that now works for the TSA. And she is a force of nature. And she was able to persuade the military government and local authorities to make this a priority. So it's a beautiful little animal. It's almost unknown here in the US or in Europe. They're about 10 inches long to a foot long, and this is where they did occur. So this is all Burma. Bangladesh is here, Thailand is here, Laos here, China here. But in this central part of Myanmar, in the Irrawaddy Valley, there's dry tropical deciduous forest, and that's where they lived. So that original 200 very quickly started laying eggs to where we were very quickly almost overrun. And so we started releasing them in a very controlled way back into national parks where they had once occurred, and now we're releasing about 2,000 a year. And these are under armed guard protection. There's now wild reproduction documented at both the two initial sites. And what we're doing now is we're moving the eggs that are captively laid into the park so that they will hatch there. And we've gone from 0 in the wild and 200 in captivity to now 18,000, both in the wild and in the breeding facilities. Everything seems to be going fine. There was we initially had an issue with animals just hard released. The first group of animals we just took out and released, some of them were recovered 20 miles away within a week. They just scattered like crazy. So we developed what we call a soft release, which was we put up a fence around a couple of hectares of land that had enough habitat for them to survive on, and we kept them there for a year. And then we opened up holes in the fence, and they had sort of identified or bonded to the area, and they slowly released and stayed pretty much in that area. So we're using that technique in a variety of other places too. And so the goal is to secure self-sustaining populations in more than 5 reserves that require minimal human intervention. In other words, just guarding and protection. And that's what we're shooting for success. And this is the Kaliar's daughter, who, all of her kids are really heavily involved in this whole project, but she's such a cutie, I had to put in a picture of her with one of these tortoises. So quickly, another critically endangered group are the Asian box turtles, Corora. They're box turtles because they have a hinge in their lower shell, and so when you pick them up, they can close their shell completely, like the box turtles in the US, but they're not related to the US ones at all. They're esteemed as food, especially in Vietnam. They were used for traditional medicine purposes, and they've been kept as pets. Of the 13 species, 4 are extinct in the wild. They're only known in our assurance colonies. 8 are critically endangered, and of those 8, another 4 are known from just an occasional individual in the wild. And 1 is vulnerable, but I put a question mark here because it's the most widespread of the group, and we've just completed a genetic study that shows that it actually is 5 different species, and 2 of them are going to be critically endangered. The one that's in the Assam area of India and one that's in the Philippines. But up to now, it was all considered 1 species, and it was only listed as vulnerable. Many of these species were scientifically described from individuals. They were acquired in markets in China. And one of them, we still have no idea where its natural range is. It's never been observed in the wild, only in markets. But they're, like I said before, they're important symbols of longevity, health, wealth. And so they're culturally very important. And the really colorful ones are being raised on farms in China, but they get very high prices for them. And the few remaining individuals are sought after by these breeders as additional breeding stock. So they're paying poachers to go into these last remnants of forest and find whatever is left. So what we've done is we have our assurance colonies in South Carolina. And this is the sort of unassuming gate to our Turtle Conservation Center. It's not open to the public. And we have greenhouses. And in a lot of cases, these Corora in particular from southern China come from a climate that's almost identical to South Carolina. So they just will hibernate and can live through the winter perfectly fine. At the Turtle Survival Center there, we have 32 species. We have 11 assurance colonies, 5 full-time staff. And these are some of the Corora that we have. they're just spectacularly beautiful animals. They get to be about 8 inches long. This one's from Vietnam. And then we also have these species, this one tortoise down here, and these two guys are endemic to the island of Sulawesi, and they've been heavily exploited for food for many, many years. And in fact, no Westerner has ever seen one of these tortoises in the wild. They are still occasionally found in various parts of Sulawesi, but and there's so much of the territory that's unexplored, so that they're not considered to be extinct, but they're damn close to it. And then we produce, we hatch all these little babies. This is a cute little baby big-headed turtle that's from southern China and northern and Laos and northern Myanmar. These things get to be about 6 inches in diameter, and they live in very high altitude cold streams, so they have to be kept cool. And they don't get along together, so they have to be maintained separately. And then some of these, like Carora picturata, we were the first ones to figure out how to reproduce them. So the last little bit here is the North American Freshwater Turtle Research Group. This was founded independently of us in '99 as a sort of a citizen science based organization to monitor turtle populations. It started off at various springs that are in parks in Texas and Florida, then it expanded to rivers, and now it has a wood turtle site in Pennsylvania. And so periodically groups of people go there and just find the turtles, swim, snorkel in the springs and rivers and catch the turtles, and they've all been marked. So we have this long-term mark recapture program that's been going on for over 20 years. And it's a really great way to engage families. And so we have lots of groups of people in Florida and Texas and actually all over the Southeast, and now growing in Pennsylvania, who get their kids and go out and look for turtles and make sure that they're marked properly and documented. And then in addition to this, something that sprung up was that near one of these springs, and then in Texas, near one of the rivers, there were brew pubs. And so after the turtle survey, the group went to these brew pubs, and the brew pubs developed this idea of drink beer, save turtles. So they sell T-shirts, and they give all their profit to the turtle conservation through this group. And so that's expanded to half a dozen of these across the Southeast now too. So to end with, in the future, I alluded to the soft shells. We need to really get big programs going for them. They don't do well in captivity, primarily because they're so big, but we're going to have to get engaged there because they're disappearing. They're falling through the cracks. The North American part, we're just going to continue to expand and engage monitoring all over the Eastern US so that we really have real data that can inform us about how populations are doing. And this is one area that I support. I fund anyone who will go do studies are for the data deficient species. Most of them now are in South America and are kind of obscure animals that there may only be 2 or 3, 4, a handful of specimens ever found. So we know basically nothing about them. Then the subspecies aspect here is that the IUCN purposefully said that they are not going to consider subspecies. The U.S. Endangered Species Act does, but when you say something it is red listed, it's just, or is endangered, it's only applying to the whole species. And The subspecies is it's crude, but it's our sort of our best indicator of evolutionary units. I mean, these are groups, populations within a species that are differentiating. They're evolving away from the parent group, and they have not been addressed worldwide for conservation purposes. And I think what we're going to have to do, meaning the TSA, we're going to have to just make our own rules and start trying to intervene on some of these subspecies that are being wiped out while the main group of the species is still doing reasonably okay. And then we really want to start Karora reintroduction programs. This all got completely stalled by the COVID, so we won't even begin to think about it until next year. But we have 2 areas in China and 2 in Vietnam where the local conservation authorities are very interested in starting a reintroduction program with animals from our assurance colony. So we'll try and do this the same way that we have done with the Burmese star tortoise. And then we're using more cutting edge genetic data, RADseq, RADCap, to appropriately repatriate confiscated turtles in the US. There's a huge demand for US turtles in China, and they're all through the Southeast. There are illegal poaching operations that are collecting box turtles, spotted turtles, wood turtles. And when these are confiscated, the authorities have no idea where to put them back. And so in some horrible cases, animals that are from Pennsylvania are just being released in Texas, and potentially polluting the genetics and the evolutionary stature of the local population. So we're really working hard on using the cutting edge genetic data to give us ways of telling where these turtles can be effectively put back. So with that, thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions if anyone's still awake.
Thank you very much, Tim. People can either send in a question in chat or just unmute yourself and you can let you ask. And while I give you a few minutes, something striking, a word was left out that I wonder if you'd comment on. It's the first time I've heard of a conservation talk where the word climate change wasn't mentioned. Does that mean it's not important? We don't know if it's important? Why not climate change in turtles?
Well, the bottom line is that we have our hands full right now, and we don't know really what the impacts are going to be. The most important climate change issue that we see is drought. So that flows in rivers and drought that affects terrestrial habitats are real and are happening, but at this point, their effect on the populations is minimal compared to these other, people just coming in and bulldozing everything to plant.
What about the issue of sex determination? There's been evidence that sea turtles are being feminized or masculinized depending on what's happening to the temperature.
Yeah, so far we've been trying to keep track of that information, but we don't have a good way of, when we head start animals, we can't tell what sex they are. There are new assays that are being developed that hopefully will help us with this. But in cases where we're like the assurance colonies and many of the reproductive programs, we're artificially incubating the animals to be 50-50. But, your point is very well taken. On some of these rivers, where the turtles are laying on sandbars, we really have no information about whether the temperature is changing enough to alter the sex ratio. So that's a very important question, and I don't have a good answer for it.
Don Mastronardi asks, two parts, how versatile is the diet for these species? And in relation, how hard is it to find habitat to restore them?
Well, in general, turtles are not dietary specialists. There are some cases where they are. The tortoises are almost sort of generalized vegetarians. There is one very interesting effect that's been observed on Mauritius, and that was originally there was a giant tortoise and a medium-sized tortoise that were endemic to Mauritius Island, east of Madagascar, and they were eaten to extinction by the Dutch and the Portuguese. And a lot of the plants on Mauritius, the native plants, have been in a slow decline that nobody really understood. And so things that were rare are getting rarer and rarer. And so very interesting experiment was done about 15 years ago, a box canyon that was owned by one of the guys who donated a bunch of money to our Madagascar program. He walled off the box canyon, and he put in there a giant tortoise, the Aldabra giant tortoise, the Indian Ocean giant tortoise that's still abundant on Aldabra Island north of Madagascar, and he put in a bunch of radiated tortoises as the medium-sized one. And what he found was that the native plants dramatically increased very rapidly. So they were adapted to going through the GI tract of a tortoise. And but in general, the opposite is not true, in that the tortoises don't really require specific vegetation. Or there are in the US, there are some of the mud and musk turtles are adapted to eating freshwater mussels, but again, they don't exclusively live on them. So,
which is good, I guess.
Luckily, they're generalist enough that that's not really been a problem.
The second part, how hard it is to find habitat, is probably a question you could ask for every plant and animal that wants to be reintroduced.
So far, most of our situations, like with the radiated tortoise and the Burmese star tortoise, there were parks. They were cleared out of existing habitat, and that existing habitat is still there.
Uh-huh.
So that is not so much of a problem. In one of the programs in Colombia, in northern Colombia, in the tropical dry forest, we have a reserve for a sort of a ugly side-neck turtle called the Dahl's toad-headed turtle that's critically endangered, and its entire habitat has been degraded for over 400 years. First thing the Spanish did when they got into Colombia was they cleared all that forest to raise the dry forest, to raise cattle. And so the turtles are just hanging on in cattle water tanks and the few remaining little streams that are there. And so we're in our new reserve that we just set up a year ago. We have a major reforestation program going on to reestablish that dry forest. We're planting thousands of trees every year. And so we'll be able to see really in real time. It's a great experiment to see how the that sort of regeneration of what of as close to what the forest was like, how that affects the turtles. But in general, well, another good one is the geometric tortoise in South Africa. That the Turtle Conservancy has a big reserve there, and it literally is the last piece of fynbos, inland fynbos habitat of that type. The whole area all around it is converted to vineyards, and the tortoises don't do well in the agricultural areas. But that I'm not sure that we don't know if there was some food there for them to eat, whether they could adapt to those secondary areas. But so I'm sorry, that's a long-winded answer to the question, but the bottom line is we don't know enough, and we're trying to get more information.
There's another question on one of the slides you showed. This is from John Erickson. I recall, I think it was a tortoise. You had what appeared to be a tracking device, looked like a baby turtle sitting on its back. The question is, if it were a female, wouldn't it interfere with mating? And no, it's a too graphic question.
No, they don't. They don't. That was the Burmese star tortoise. That's how we put transmitters on that first group of 50 that we just released in the middle of the national park. And that's why I say we had, I think only a couple of them stayed in the area. The rest just took off trying to find something they recognized. But so far there doesn't appear to be any effect of those transmitters. They place them higher up on the shell than
with a male.
Yeah, the males in those tortoises that have really steep backs to the shells, the males are literally at 90 degrees to the female when they're mating. So the answer is, so far we haven't seen an effect.
A question from Linda Sands. Based on your presentation, it appears that habitat destruction and culture are the biggest threats. Now, they're huge hurdles, and it must be very challenging to any effort you make to reintroduce or save these things.
Well, the approach we're taking is to acquire reserves whenever we can. In India, along rivers, it's been really problematic, but they also have a very interesting system there that we're about to start taking advantage of. And that is that you may not be able to acquire the land on the sides of the river, but independently you can lease the fishing rights for 5 miles of the stretch of a stream or a river. And we're going to try and use that in the coming year as a mechanism to test out whether that's enough to protect them. For some of these big animals like the batigers, they go hundreds of miles. They really go all over the place. But a lot of the other freshwater turtles in Southeast Asia stay they have a more or less a defined range within a river. And so that's one thing we really need to figure out. The cultural aspect, we have to address that constantly. So every program has a community outreach part of it that's trying to get people to stop killing the tortoises, to try and use nets that will allow turtles to get through. So you have to, there is a major community engagement with all of these projects. And so far, it's remarkable how receptive the people are. I think it goes I've seen the same sort of a phenomenon with plant conservation in Mexico, that, with a lot of the rural and indigenous populations, they're frankly surprised that someone cares about these animals that are, or plants that are in their environment. And when they find out, if they have a scientist come and really sort of, take the time to explain to them how important it is, and how, how valuable it is to the world, there's a pride factor that kicks in, or an awareness factor that I've seen it multiple times in Mexico. I've seen it in Colombia. I've seen it in Madagascar, where that seems to be the one of the keys to engaging with the local community, to let them know that what they think is just a common, a lot of times you have to convince them that radiated tortoises don't occur in LA. I mean, these are all over the place. Why aren't they all? Well, they do, a few, but I don't know if, that's another long-winded answer to the question. But first, community engagement and adaptation of our approach to the culture is critical in every one of these places. But on their side, attention and acknowledgement that them becoming aware that what they have is unique to their area really plays a very powerful, surprising to me, role. It gives them a sense of ownership and pride in their environment, and that helps a lot. So
Linda Sands also points out, knowing that you did not cover intentionally sea turtles, she had recently visited Isla Mujeres and was amazed at the work they're doing there to save the species. And I know it's another whole story, another whole story.
Well, that's one of the things that's really important that we're taking into consideration with our strategic assessment, is the fecundity of the animals. So, if you have a tortoise that lays one egg a year, it's going to take you a long time for them to recover. But if you have something like a Batagur, or even a Burmese star tortoise that lays 15 or 20 eggs a year, or a sea turtle that lays 100, then just saving one nest can have a really big impact. And so that's one of the life history traits that we're paying special attention to in our strategic assessments.
Well, Tim, I want to thank you again. I'm sure you can say to everyone, if you want to help save anything, put your support into it. If you can't be out there yourself doing it, support the people who are doing it.
Yep.
And thanks for giving us some hope.
Yeah.
Thank you all for attending.
If anyone has any future questions, Paul knows he knows where I live.
Okay. Thank you, Tim.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.